Rockotar is not really a bad YouTuber. He's fine. But his Lion King review, sheesh, that video was absolutely awful. And today I'm going to debunk it. Yes, the video is 3 years old, but I don't really care. This is my channel. Plus, he doesn't really seem to have changed his mind on the movie, so I'm just going to debunk it really quickly. We're gonna skip first few minutes because it's just him saying how the movie is fine but overrated. So let's get to the points and debunk them.
My first point would have to be that Simba is not exactly the greatest Disney main character, if you ask me. He's one of the most vanilla Disney protagonists that we've ever gotten, in my personal opinion. There's almost nothing about his personality that stands out. Everything that has to do with him as a character is part of the story, not his personality. Like when he tries to be bold and gets himself into trouble, or runs away when Scar tricks him into thinking that he's responsible for Mufasa's death. Sure, these events tell us something about Simba as a character, but I feel like we never really get to know him. A lot of what he does as a kid is just very basic, idiot kid does stupid things kind of stuff. And then when he's an adult, he somehow becomes even more boring. They don't even go into that much depth with the whole storyline of him trying to reject his responsibilities, but I'll get more into that later. And overall, he's just not my favorite. Not bad, just kinda there.
First of all this is just subjective. Nothing here is objective, and you didn't really prove why Simba is a bad protagonist. His personality is pretty consistent throughout the movie, and it works narratively well. Is there a scene where he acted out of character or something? Because you don't point that out. Yes, Simba is sort of basic, but that basic doesn't really mean bad. We still do learn about his personality, him being a responsible little kid and then growing up into an actual man. Also, what do you mean they don't focus on his trauma responsibility that much? They do. That was set up and built up throughout the entire movie, from him being a little kid to him talking to Nala multiple times about taking responsibility, him talking to Rafiki and Mufasa, in the clowns, and so on and so forth. There are multiple scenes, and the movie really does focus on him being irresponsible and becoming a man, because that's the point of the whole story. Did you even watch the movie?
Another aspect of this movie that's actually quite vanilla is the writing. It's not actually that good. And I'm not talking about the plot per se, though there are a couple moments I'll get to, but more so just the dialogue and general writing in that sense. It doesn't have nearly the depth or wit that other better movies, like The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Wreck-It Ralph, or Pinocchio have. I mean, it's filled with basic lines like, "Oh no, not the birdie boiler!" and "tastes like chicken."
You literally just cherry-picked 2 lines. The lines with the hyenas is just obviously showing their personalities, being kind of like psychopaths who like having fun by literally hurting other animals. And for Timon, that was a fucking joke. Couldn't you picked actual lines and dialogue? The dialogue still shows us characters and stuff. It works narratively well in the story. So this is honestly really a bad point.
As I briefly mentioned, this does occasionally affect the story, such as the "I Can't Wait to Be King" song, in which Simba tries to get rid of Zazu. But if you think about it, it doesn't actually make any sense. Simba couldn't possibly have planned this distraction or have known that a rhino would conveniently sit on top of Zazu at the end. Where do all these animals even come from? Why would he go through all the trouble of telling them to meet up in this one place? That doesn't make any sense, so surely he didn't do that. It also makes even less sense once you consider The Lion King 1.5, where the only reason all the animals fell down on top of Zazu was because of Timon and Pumbaa, who obviously Simba hadn't even known yet at this point. So there's definitely no way that he could have told all of them.
Thought we wouldn't notice, but we did.
And I know what some of you are typing in the comments right now that wasn't added until a later sequel movie. Yes, I do in fact know that, but it still doesn't make sense whether or not that exists. It just makes it make even less sense in retrospect now. So the only real reason that Simba would even bother singing this song in the first place is just to annoy Zazu, which then begs the question, what is the point? What does this add to the story? Simba wants to annoy Zazu? Essentially, you could cut this entire scene and nothing would change about the movie. I mean, we already clearly know that Simba wants to be king. He doesn't have to sing a whole song about it. Maybe I'm being too harsh on this scene. I don't know. It just feels kind of pointless to me.
There is a lot to debunk here. First of all, it was only stated that Simba and Nala just wanted to stop Zazu at all costs, and this was probably all just Simba's imagination, consistent because the Mufasa scene where Simba was imagining Mufasa there. That's why Rafiki said he lives in you. So Simba having high imagination is pretty consistent. Second of all, the whole Lion King 1.5 argument should be taken with a grain of salt, because those are home releases movies. There aren't made from the original team. Third of all, you bringing up that argument is pointless and just padding the runtime, because you just say why that's a pointless argument anyways. And fourth of all, the reason why this song exists is it continues the story, because that's why Simba and Nala go to the elephant graveyard and the whole movie happens. B, it shows us Simba's character about being responsible, aka something that you completely complained about the character lacking. Like, when you want to, like, you really want the movie to show why Simba is irresponsible, and when the movie does show you, you just throw it away, you ignore it, which is really disingenuous at your part.
Who, if you ask me, are kind of lame villains who aren't even that funny. I mean, I get that they're kind of supposed to be stupid so that they can only win if Scar is leading them, but most of the time they just show up to ruin the dramatic, serious tone of the movie and make it a bit more lighthearted, but not entirely in a good way. I don't know, it's hard to explain. It's yet again one of those things that it's not bad per se, but just not great either. You know, in fact,
first of all, comedy is subjective. Second of all, isn't the most intense scene in the movie like the hyenas chasing Nala and Simba? That was a pretty intense and mature scene. Sure, the hyenas were being a little goofy, but that's the point of their characters, being psychotic and stuff. So I have no idea what you're talking about. This section is kind of pointless, because the hyenas weren't even making jokes or anything like that. The scenes are still taken really seriously. Did you watch the movie?
the comedy in general in this movie is not actually that good either. A lot of the jokes might be good on paper, but most of them lack the comedic timing to actually make them great. Not all of them are flat, there's a couple good ones, but a large portion of them just don't land in my opinion. And they're not necessarily cringe-inducingly bad, well, except I feel the Pumbaa fart jokes, which are a bit cringy. And actually, prior to this movie, Disney had never had to stoop to the low of using fart jokes, but starting with this very movie, they decided that it was a valid source of humor, which is definitely a knock against this movie if you ask me.
First of all, comedy is subjective. Once again, you're not making objective claims. Second of all, fart jokes are really not that bad. Stop being a baby, please. It's just so annoying how many adult-ass humans throw tantrums about them. It's pretty pointless.
As for Timon and Pumbaa themselves, they're just okay. Personally, I think Timon and Pumbaa are better in The Lion King 1.5. And that in this movie, like, there's this scene where they're walking through the jungle, singing,
In the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight.
How do they know this song? Obviously, this is a pop culture reference, which there are actually quite a few in this movie. Which then begs the question, why do other Disney movies get criticized for having pop culture references, but The Lion King gets away free? It's not like the pop culture references in this movie are so much better than the other Disney movies. Well, they're better than Ralph Breaks the Internet's pop culture references, but we don't talk about that movie, except that time that I did for 59 minutes. But
the reason why pop culture references in this movie work is because they're subtle, and due to characters' personality, it makes sense. Like the Lion in the Jungle song, well, I mean, they have a lion in the jungle, and it's not like it's gonna catch people off guard or something. It makes sense. Like, why don't you ask the same question about Hakuna Matata or every other song in the movie?
where was I? They have a couple good moments, more so Timon than Pumbaa, but as mentioned with the comedy, considering they're the comic relief characters, a lot of their jokes just don't land. And there are some jokes that almost land, like the scene where Timon is dead certain that the stars are actually fireflies.
They're fireflies. Fireflies that got stuck up in that big bluish black thing.
But then they have to follow this up immediately with a fart joke,
Pumbaa, with you, everything's gas.
which kind of just kills the humor of the mood. And then this immediately leads into a serious scene. And that leads me to another point about this movie that I need to bring up. The Hunchback of Notre Dame is constantly criticized for being tonally inconsistent, generally being dark and serious for the majority of its runtime, and then suddenly we have gargoyle shenanigans interrupting the mood. And those people would be right. If it were possible to delete the gargoyles from Hunchback of Notre Dame, I would. But that begs the question, why does the Hunchback of Notre Dame get criticized for being tonally inconsistent, while the Lion King gets off free? Yes, my friends, this movie is indeed tonally inconsistent. As I mentioned with the joke previously, this movie jumps back and forth between when it's trying to be comedic and lighthearted and dark and serious, that it never really settles on one or the other. For a good portion of this movie, it feels like it's made almost exclusively for young children. Most of the unfunny humor feels like it was written specifically to target children, and at one point they even break the fourth wall to exclusively address the children, not the audience, but the children watching the movie.
Pumbaa, not in front of the kids.
It's a fucking joke. Why are you trying to imply that this movie doesn't respect children's intelligence? It's a joke. Stop taking it so seriously.
Simultaneously, this movie is filled with some of the darkest and most serious scenes in any Disney movie. Whenever the movie's being silly, the dark stuff comes out of nowhere and completely changes the mood. But whenever the movie is being dark and serious, the comedy suddenly comes in and ruins the serious mood. In fact, I genuinely believe that The Hunchback of Notre Dame is more tonally consistent for the majority of its runtime than this movie is, because at least the gargoyle shenanigans only pop up every once in a while throughout what is a mostly dark and serious movie, whereas this movie is constantly flipping back and forth between dark and serious and lighthearted and comedic. And then there's my next point, which is that the romance in this movie is not that good either. It's not really that developed or believable. Simba barely barely even knew Nala. Sure, they messed around as kids, but he spent more of his life goofing off with Timon and Pumbaa than he ever spent with Nala. I'd also say that When You Feel the Love Tonight is probably one of the most overrated Disney songs of all time. I never really understood why people liked it that much. It's a fine song, but I don't know whose idea it was to book into the song with Timon and Pumbaa segments. Not exactly the most romantic characters. And even the main song itself is just fine. There are significantly better love songs in Disney. I mean, the amount of praise this song gets is the amount of praise I would think a song like Now I See the Light from Tangled would get. You know, actually, a lot of the songs in this movie aren't as good as people say, except Be Prepared and Circle of Life, which are genuine masterpieces. Even Hakuna Matata is not that great, especially the Pumbaa fart segment that really kills the song for me.
First of all, yes, Nala and Simba knew one another as kids, which is pretty much believable why they would fall in love. Plus, it is build it up. You know, Zazu brought up how they could probably get married and stuff. Second of all, why aren't the other songs good? You don't say why. They add to the story and, you know, show us the characters. You didn't debunk anything.
And I've saved the best for last. Or should I say the worst for last? Basically, I've saved the most important point. The main thing that convinced me to make this video in the first place. The fact that the second half or last third of the movie, depending on where you'd say this starts to happen, is super rushed. Basically, as soon as Simba grows up, suddenly he's immediately challenged to go back to the Pride Lands and give up his goofy around with Timon and Pumbaa, only to immediately change his mind and decide that he is going back, in which immediately, after he gets back, he immediately defeats Scar and the movie immediately ends. Because of how
It does not just immediately end. What are you talking about? The reason why Nala challenges Simba is because, well, he has to get home. You know, it's his responsibility. And it actually takes a while to actually convince Simba why he should go back to the Pride Lands, take responsibility, grow up, and move away from his past. It's not just out of nowhere or immediate or
how
fast.
fast everything happens in the second half. The impact of Scar's takeover of the Pride Lands lacks the depth that it should have, as well as the supposed lesson that's supposed to be learned about responsibility, which should be the most important part of Simba's entire plotline. Being in denial about his responsibility and trying to run away from it is basically completely solved immediately after it's brought up, and thus his redemption feels somewhat hollow in my opinion. Also, we don't really get a good idea of how Scar keeps his power. How does no one realize Scar is evil and not just to kill him or remove him from power? Is it that hard? I mean, why can't the lions just kick out Scar or the hyenas? Sure, Mufasa is dead, but that implies that he was single-handedly keeping the entire army from invading, which doesn't make any sense in my opinion. Surely, the remaining lions and lionesses could fight off the hyenas, since it should be obvious that Scar is evil. If he and his minions ruined the land, they need to be removed from power. It doesn't matter if he's the quote-unquote king, and the fact that all the problems of the Pride Lands just go away as soon as Simba shows up, it just makes every other lion look incompetent. And later, when Simba shows up to fight Scar, there's this big scene where Scar tries to make the lions believe that Simba is responsible for Mufasa's death.
Tell them who is responsible for Mufasa's death. I am.
But then, about 1 or 2 minutes later, he reveals the truth.
I killed Mufasa.
So why even bother with the big scene?
The reason why the lionesses didn't overthrow him is because he had fucking hyenas. He had a whole ass army. The only reason why the lionesses decided to fight back is because, first of all, Simba came back, somebody who could actually replace Scar as the king. Second, there were way too many hyenas. It's only when all the hyenas attacked Simba at once, it's when the lionesses could sneak behind the hyenas and, you know, defeat them. Plus, they had help. And also, you do know that after Mufasa died and seemingly Simba did too, literally no one could have taken the throne. Scar was the only options. You know, you need a king in order to rule. Plus, Sarabi couldn't take the throne because, well, I don't know how she would rule under the circumstances that her husband and her son literally died. Are you stupid? Did you watch the movie? Also, the reason why the big scene happens, or why Scar tells Simba about how he killed his father, that's the point. Scar is basically a man-child, and this was set up throughout the entire movie. He is irresponsible and stuff, and he's a contrast to Simba. So, you know, him telling the truth is the point. That's the point of the characters. You analyze movies. You should know this. Do you analyze movies or not?
One final thing I want to bring up before I close out my thoughts on this movie. A thing that holds back the movie from me, but might not hold it back for other people, so I didn't want to exactly throw it in with all the rest of the things I've been saying. And that being that this is a movie about animals. And for me, that does bring it down a bit personally, as I find it much harder to relate to a bunch of animals than actual human characters.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
The movie as a whole, in my opinion, would be improved simply by being about human characters and not lion characters. But like I said, that's just my personal opinion on Disney animal movies in general, and it thus isn't exactly a valid criticism, just an opinion. But it is something that I had to bring up because it does add to why I think this movie is overrated for me personally. You see,
how is that a way to, like, perceive art? Just because it's about a bunch of animals doesn't mean the movie is just suddenly weaker or bad. Plus, if this is just a subjective opinion, then it's completely pointless to the video and you can just easily remove it. There's no reason for it to be here. Also, you literally praise a lot of movies about animals. Kung Fu Panda, The Ice Age in Your Letterbox, and so many others. So do you relate to animals or not? I think you're just just bullshitting for sake of bullshitting. And yeah, that's basically the entire video. He then in the end says like how he tried to like the movie, how much he tried to cherry pick it and just criticize it for the absolute dumbest, most bullshit reasons. I just don't believe him. Anyways, that's all for now. Goodbye.